Today we're going to do lesson 2.5, solving compound inequalities. The essential question says, how can you use inequalities to describe intervals on the real number line? Now, we're talking about compound inequalities. Can anyone give me a good definition or a description of the word compound? When you hear compound, what do you think? Okay, conjoining two different things, right? Two is the key here. Because look at the definition of a compound inequality. It consists of two inequalities connected by and or. All right, so fill in those blanks. A compound inequality consists of two inequalities. So in one problem, you're going to have two inequalities connected by either the word and or the word or. Now let's look at the difference between the two types of compound inequalities. The first one is the word and, all right? When the two inequalities are separated by the word and. This one is going to be written with the variable in the middle, and the graph is going to be the intersection of both sets of solutions. So fill in the blanks, and then I want you to highlight and, variable in the middle, and intersection. And we're going to talk about this and we're going to dissect this. If you look at the example that I've given you, you can clearly see that the variable is in the middle. This one is the trickier of the two. And it's because if you don't read this correctly, you will not graph it correctly. So we've got to go back to last week when we first started this lesson. And we have to remember, when we read an inequality, where do we want to start? You've got variables and you've got numbers in inequalities. Which one do I need to start with when I'm reading the inequality? The variable. So you've got to be careful because the variable is in the middle of this problem. So I have to read from the variable. If I do that, then this reads x is greater than 0 and x is less than or equal to 4. So you have to make sure that you're reading from the variable. Now, let's talk about the intersection of the two. When you graph a compound inequality, you graph both inequalities on the same line. So the number line is going to be a little bit different than what we've been doing because it's only going to have two numbers on it. It's going to have the two numbers from the inequality. The question is which one goes to the left and which one goes to the right. So I need you to think about a number line. As I move left on a number line, what's happening to my numbers? They're getting smaller. And as I move to the right, they're getting larger. So the smaller number in our problem is going to go to the left and the larger number is going to go to the right. So for this particular problem, what number is going to the left? The smaller number is 0, so it goes to the left, and the larger number is 4, and it goes to the right. Now, determining the circles, nothing's changed. If x is greater than 0, what type of circle should be on 0? An open circle. Why an open circle? Because it's just greater than, which means 0 is not part of our solution. Now, on number 4, our circle should be what? Closed, because it's less than or equal to. So 4 is part of the solution, but that or equal to line lets us know that we should close the circle. Now, you've got to be careful. Like I said, if you don't read these right, you will not graph them right. The arrow from 0 should be going in what direction for this problem? To the right, because x is greater than 0. So remember last week we talked about how the symbol, whatever direction the symbol points, is the direction the arrow should point. That goes out the window for compound inequalities with and. You have to pay attention. It's x is greater than 0. So my arrow from 0 should actually be going to the right. Now, look at the 4. My x is less than or equal to 4. So what direction should the arrow be going from the 4? To the left, which means as I draw my arrow to the left, it actually is going to run into my other arrow. So we're going to remove the arrow heads, and we're just going to let those two lines intersect with each other. All right? So you say, Ms. Johnson, how am I going to remember the difference between and or? Here's the first thing. And has the variable in the middle, and the graph should meet in the middle. So the variable's in the middle, and the graph should meet in the middle. Now, let's look and dissect the or problem. Or, the compound inequalities with or are written as two separate inequalities, and the graph is the union of both sets of solution. So this one is more what we've been seeing, because if you look at the example I've given you, right smack in the middle of the two inequalities is the word or. And every single time you write me a compound inequality that has or is going to be in your answer. Now, do you see on the left, that's x is less than -1, or x is greater than 2. Now, we're still going to graph on the same number line. So which number needs to go to the left and which number needs to go to the right? Which one is smaller? Which one goes to the left? -1. And which one is larger and goes to the right? 2. All right. Circle on -1 should be what? Open, because it's just less than. And circle on the 2 should be open, because it's just less than. Or I'm sorry, just greater than. All right, no or equal to. Now, the arrow from the -1 should be going what direction? X is less than -1. X is less than -1. Remember, this is more typical of what we've been seeing. So you can look at the symbol. The direction the symbol is pointing is the direction your arrow should be pointing. All right, so x is less than -1, so my arrow is going to the left. X is greater than 2, so from 2, what direction should my arrow be going? To the right. Now, you say, how am I going to remember this one? All right, or is two separate inequalities. The graph is going in two different directions. All right, so my and problems, the variable's in the middle, the graph meets in the middle. If it's an or problem, it's two separate inequalities. The graph goes two separate or different directions. Now, example number 1 just wants us to write the inequality and graph the inequality. So let's look at letter A. The key to this is recognizing whether you're dealing with an and problem or if you're dealing with an or problem. So letter A says a number D is more than 0 and less than 10. So can you tell what kind of problem this is? Yeah. It's an and problem, all right? Highlight the word and, circle the word and, make the word and stand out. So I've got to begin to remember things about the and problems, like where does the variable go in an and problem? In the middle. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write down the variable D. Now, I've got two numbers, all right? Which one's going on the left? Which one's going on the right? Well, remember how we graphed. The smaller number goes to the left, the larger number goes to the right. Same thing is true when you're writing the compound inequality. So which number is going to the left? 0, and which number is going to the right? 10. And you'll notice I left a space because I have to put in my inequality symbols. Now, a number D is more than 0. So what inequality symbol should I be using? More than. Greater than. All right? Now, you got to be careful. You're like, Ms. Johnson, you just put a less than symbol. Not if I'm reading from D, I didn't. If I'm reading from D, I put D is greater than 2, which is exactly what I'm supposed to do. All right? What about 10? It says a number D is more than 0 and less than 10. So what's my other inequality symbol? Less than, okay? Less than. So D is less than 10. Again, double check yourself. Once you put the symbol down, read it. Does it read D is less than 10? And this is your compound inequality. Now let's graph it. If you've written the inequality correctly, then dropping the numbers down on the number line should be easy. What number goes on the left? 0. And what number goes on the right? 10. The circle on 0 should be what? Open. And the circle on 10? Open. Should also be open because these are just greater than and just less than. These numbers are not part of the solution. Now, the arrow from 0 should be going what direction? D is greater than 0, so my arrow should be going to the right. And from 10, my arrow should be going to the what? To the left, which means my two lines are going to intersect as they should. Now, let me give you this tip. Don't just assume. Don't go, oh, well, this is an and problem, so I'm going to draw my circles and I'm just going to automatically make the two connect. You need to graph what you've written on paper. Because if you've written it wrong on paper, it'll show up in your graph, right? So make sure you graph what you've written. Don't just assume. All right, now letter B. A number A is fewer than -6 or no less than -3. So what type of problem are we dealing with here? Or. Again, highlight it, underline it, make it stand out. So if this is an or problem, how many inequalities am I actually writing? 2. I'm writing 2 separate inequalities. So let's write the first one. A number A is fewer than -6. What's that going to look like? A is less than -6. Very good. Now remember, this is key. The word or has to go into your final answer. So go ahead and drop down the word or. And now we have to write the second inequality. So from start to finish, Kalani, what is the second inequality going to be? A is, it says no less than. So let's talk about that. Can my number be any smaller than -3? No. So what symbol, Kalani, is that going to be? Say it again. Okay, but what's the symbol? Greater than or less than? This is my greater than symbol. Could it be exactly -3? Yeah. Kalani, could it be less than, or could it be exactly equal to -3? Yes. So it's greater than or equal to, and it's -3. So this is my final compound inequality. Now, we still graph on the same line. So what number is going to the left? -6 is the smaller number, so it goes to the left, and -3 is going to the right. The circle on -6 should be what? Open, and the circle on -3 should be closed. Again, the -6 is just less than, so it's open because it's not part of the solution, and -3 is greater than or equal to. So we close the circle because it is part of the solution. Now, the arrow. If A is less than -6, what direction should my arrow go? Less than. A is less than -6. To the left. And if A is greater than or equal to -3, the arrow from -3 should go to the right. Now again, don't assume. Don't say, oh, this is an or problem, so as soon as I draw my circles, I'm going in opposite directions. Because if for some reason, based on what you wrote, you ended up with this, you know you did something wrong. All right, so graph what you've actually written. But this is correct. The arrows, 2 separate inequalities, 2 separate or different directions. Now we're going to move into solving compound inequalities. Again, it's key that you recognize right off the bat what type of problem you're dealing with or solving. So if I look at letter A, can you tell me what kind of problem we are dealing with? And how do you know that it is an and problem? The variable is in the middle. Perfect. Now, I would somewhere around letter A, I'd give myself the note that this is an and problem. Now, I don't have a lot of people struggle because the goal is still the same. We're still trying to isolate the variable, which in letter A is what? The variable is m, okay? So in order to get m by itself, what do we need to move? Okay, we need to move the 4, and we need to move it with everyone. We need to move it with what? Subtraction. Now, I don't have, as I was saying, a lot of people that struggle with moving or subtracting 4 from the middle and the right. I do have people forget that in a compound inequality like this, there is also a left side to this problem. So you have to subtract 4 from the middle, the right, and the left. If you forget about the left, everything's going to go downhill. Your answer is going to be wrong, which makes your graph wrong, and it's just going to be a mess. So we must subtract, in this case, the 4 from the middle, the right, and the left. Now, it cancels in the middle if I've done it correctly. So m is less than, what's 10 minus 4? 6, and m is greater than or equal to 1. Now, what's the last question we ask ourselves when solving an inequality? So, do we need to flip the sign? No, we do not. So we box this in, and now we're going to graph it. So on the number line, what number goes to the left?
1.
What number goes to the right?
6.
The circle on 1 should be closed because it's or equal to, and the circle on 6 should be open because it's just less than. The arrow from 1 should be going what direction? Read from the middle. Read from the variable. M is greater than 1. So my arrow should be going to the right. From 6, my arrow should be going, m is less than 6, so my arrow should be going to the left, and they meet in the middle as they should. All right, letter B. And or? Or, right off the bat. Now, we're doing this in our notes, and I would do this on homework, quizzes, and tests. Because believe it or not, every year I have students who try to treat an or problem like one big inequality. They start subtracting 3, and they subtract 3 from every single term that they see. So please identify the word or, because it's your split. It splits the left inequality from the right inequality. So let's focus on the left one. And again, our goal is to isolate the variable, which is what? C. If you're still struggling with that, circle the C. Make it stand out. Now, don't call me after midnight has not gone anywhere. If we end up with multi-step inequalities in these compound inequalities, that's okay. We're not going to panic. But we can see pretty clearly what's the first thing we need to do here. Subtract 3, because remember, we're supposed to add or subtract before we multiply or divide. So we want to move that 3, and we're going to subtract it from both sides. So 4C is less than or equal to, what's negative 5 minus 3? Negative 8. And then how do we finish this problem? Divide both sides by 4. So C is less than or equal to what? Negative 2. Now, last question we ask, do we need to flip the sign? Do we? No. Remember, it doesn't matter if my answer is negative. It matters the last thing I did. And the last thing I did was divide by a positive number. Now, don't box that in because that's not your final answer. Let's look at this second inequality. I'm still trying to get C by itself. This time, what do I have to do? I have to add 8 to both sides. So, C is greater. I got distracted. I have to add 8 to both sides. What is negative 1 plus 8? 7. Now, last question. What is it? And do I need to flip the sign? No. I do not. So watch what I'm going to do. In your notes, yes, you need to do this. Do you need to do this on a test or quiz? No. But I want you to draw an arrow, and I want you to show you have to drop down the word or. If or is not in your answer, you will lose points. So drop down the word or, and then drop down C is greater than 7, because we want to be able to box in the whole answer at once. But this is your final answer. Now, what number goes to the left? And what number goes to the right?
7.
All right, the circle on negative 2 should be what? Closed, because it's less than or equal to. And the circle on 7 should be open, because it's just greater than. The arrow from negative 2 should be going what direction? Left, because it's less than. And the arrow from 7 should be going right, because it is greater than. Again, don't assume. Graph what you've actually written, because if your graph ended up looking different than this, you know you did something wrong. All right, letter C. Are we dealing with an and problem or an or problem? This is an and again, how do we know it's an and? The variable is in the middle. So I would identify that somewhere in your notes. And what is the variable that we're trying to isolate? K. All right, so again, if you're still struggling, you can circle the variable. What Ariel do we need to move first? Ariel. All right, I got to move the 5 because remember I'm supposed to add or subtract. So we're going to add 5. Remember, you're adding it to the middle, to the right, and to the left. So in the middle it should cancel, and 2K is less than, what's 7 plus 5? 12. And 2K is greater than, what's negative 3 plus 5? 2. All right, Colin, how do we finish solving for K? We're going to divide everything by 2. Again, the middle, the right, and the left. So K is less than 6, and K is greater than 1. Now, a question was asked earlier that was a great question. What happens if we were to flip the signs in an and problem? Well, first of all, let's decide in this one, do we need to flip the sign? No. We divided, but the last thing we did was divide by a positive number. So for this particular problem, nothing is changing, and we're boxing in our answer. But what if we did have to flip the sign? All right, you got to be careful in an and problem, because when you flip the sign, you have to flip both of them. So just keep that in mind. If ever you did need to flip the sign in an and problem, you would be flipping both of them. All right, let's graph this. What number goes to the left?
1.
And what number goes to the right? 6. Circle on 1. Open. And circle on 6. Open. They're both greater than or less than, no or equal to. The arrow from 1 should be going what direction? Okay, good, because K, we read it from K. K is greater than 1. And from 6, K is less than 6. So again, the arrows meet in the middle, so we let them intersect. All right, letter D. And or? Or. So there again, circle the word or, highlight it, let it stand out, and separate your inequalities into 2 separate. All right, we're solving for what variable this time? P. And so on the left inequality, what do we need to move first?
1.
How do we move it? We're going to subtract 1 from both sides. So 2P is less than -8. All right, and how do we finish this one? Divide both sides by 2. So P is less than, what's -8 divided by 2? -4. And do I need to flip the sign?
No.
All right, for the second inequality, we're still trying to isolate that P, so what are we moving first over here? 3. And how are we moving it? Subtract. Remember, you've got to add or subtract before you can multiply or divide. So we subtract, and we have -2P is less than or equal to what? -2. And how do we finish this problem? Divide both sides by -2. So P is less than or equal to 1. Now, what's the last question we ask? And do we need to flip the sign?
Yes.
Yes, look, the last thing we did was divide both sides by a negative. So we do flip the sign, and P is actually going to be greater than or equal to 1. And again, draw that arrow down and bring down the word or. Because if you don't bring down the word or, you will not get full credit. But this is your final answer. P is less than -4, or P is greater or equal to 1. Now let's graph. What number goes to the left? And what number goes to the right?
1.
Circle on -4.
Open.
Open. And circle on 1. Closed. Arrow from -4. Left, because P is less than -4. And arrow from the right. To the right, because P is greater than or equal to 1. Again, 2 separate inequalities. Graphs should be going in 2 separate or different directions. And that is lesson 2.5.